It's so good to see you. I'm so glad that you're here and a part of this experience that we call River's Edge. And we are so excited that we can continue this series that we are in called Signs. And it's incredible how many people have been just telling me how this is impacting them, helping them not only understand that God is listening, but He's always clearly speaking. And I know that He is speaking to us all the time. Sometimes we just don't know how to listen, and we need to understand those signs. Last week, I started a message that I thought I was going to get through. I was talking about 5 different points, and we never got past point number 1. And I felt like God was just kept telling me to focus in on that specific point. And it was about how we can just find ourselves in this place of inner unease, sometimes really a place of torment, a place where we do not have peace, and how God uses that to speak to us, and how it tells us that we are not in alignment with God, that the decision that we're about to make isn't the right one, that the steps that we're taking need to stop, and we need to go in a new direction. Well, today I want to continue from where we left off and continue with the message that is found in this series that we're in about confusion. I want to speak to you about confusion because confusion is something that we struggle with a lot. We don't know what steps to take, what direction to go, what to do. There are things that we struggle with. And that is something that I believe all of us face on a regular basis. Confused about whether this is the right person for us, whether this is worth fighting for, whether this is worth all the trouble. In areas like that especially, we tend to want to just move on and find peace. We can be confused about doors that are open before us. Sometimes we have more than one opportunity. Sometimes we're confused by the sheer lack of opportunity. And we feel like if we don't do something, that if we don't make things happen, well, things won't happen. And so there are a lot of things that come into play when we are trying to figure out what it is that we need to do. Well, the scriptures tell us that when there is ongoing confusion, this is something that is a sign from God. God is trying to tell us that we should not be in a constant spiraling descent of confusion. We should not be in a place where we're always confused. If we are always confused, that means it is clearly a sign from God telling us the answer that we will not accept. It isn't that God isn't speaking, it's that we refuse to listen. And people always tell me, Pastor, I'm just confused about this. It's a sign. It's a sign. And I think what might be happening is that there might be a battle of the wills here. And it feels very much like maybe your will doesn't want to submit to God's will, or maybe you're just battling, fighting, resisting, doing everything in your power to make sure that you actually do not do this very thing that we are referring to and talking about, or God is just somehow leading and directing you towards. And so I want to put this up here. If you often feel confused about a particular situation, I want you to know that that is a sign. And God is speaking to you. God is trying to tell you, listen, you've got to understand that this is something that you are fighting. This is something that you are resisting. This is something that you are challenging me on. This is something that you want, but I don't want it for you. This is something that you want more than what I have for you. This is something that you desire more than you should. This is something that you need to let go of and trust me for what I've got in store for you instead. And it's hard to do this. I get it. That's why in 1 Corinthians 14:33 it says this, "For God is not a God of disorder, but of peace, as in all the meetings of God's holy people." And so this is just not an instruction for when we gather as a church, but it's a principle. If God is a God of order, then that means we have to observe that order even in our inner selves. It isn't just an external order, it's an inner order. It isn't just something that is happening around us, it has to also do with what is happening or not happening within us. God is saying, if you don't have this external order, how do you expect there to be an inner order? How do you want there to be an external order if there's no inner order? And so we have to turn to the God who's the God of peace. And when you feel confused about what to do in your current circumstances, it says very clearly, I want you to reach out for God's wisdom instead. It means start putting aside your list of pros and cons. Stop paying attention to your emotions and how they're driving your decision making. Stop highlighting all the reasons why this has always been a desire in your heart and you feel like time is running out. And because time is working against you, you feel so strongly about the fact that you need to move powerfully forward to make this happen. When we do this, we often enter into a prolonged state of confusion. Well, I don't know why I can't say prolonged, but we enter into a prolonged state of confusion. And that's why in James chapter 1, verse 5, it says that if you need wisdom, I want you to ask our generous God, and He's going to give it to you. And God is basically telling us that when you are in a state of confusion, the thing that you should be asking for is God's wisdom. You need God's wisdom to help break this deadlock in your mind and in your heart that is being governed by your emotions, that is fighting so strongly against God's will and making sure that you enforce your own. You have to turn to God's wisdom. And then see that He is a generous God, meaning that He will not withhold His wisdom. He will not withhold this gift from you. It means that if you believe that God is going to give it to you, He will do exactly that. And that you don't have to stay in this state of confusion. And He's not going to rebuke you for asking. It's not something that He looks to and says, why must you ask this? Or why would you ask me this? And because you ask me this, I will not answer this. It's not God's attitude towards you at all. He sees us in a state of confusion, and what God says, I know that if you persist in this state of confusion, not only will you make the wrong decision, but this can lead to greater unbelief. So God doesn't like it when we are in a state of confusion. He doesn't like it when we're doubting. He doesn't like it when we're confused. What He wants is to live in a place of certainty, even if things are still unseen. That's why it is faith. I don't see it, but I believe it. I trust it. And I trust that the God who oversees everything in my life, this God is going to give me the wisdom that I need. And so when we find ourselves in a state of confusion, many of us, we look for distractions and for things to kind of comfort us. We can turn to things like distractions of entertainment, of people, of activity and busyness, distractions of food and exercise, distractions of travel, and distractions that pertain to how we just cope. Sometimes there are harder distractions, more challenging distractions, distractions that can sometimes lead us down a very negative and dangerous path. Distractions like gambling. Sometimes we can find ourselves distracting ourselves with pornography, finding ourselves distracted by wanting a connection and a relationship with someone even though we're married. And we just look for the line and we find the border and we get as close as we can to it and try not to cross over. We look for things to ease our discomfort. And we think that sometimes a person or a place or a position or power, these things are going to somehow bring what's missing. And we pursue these things, but all those things just represent what can just lead us to even greater distractions. And when we've got pain, we don't know how to deal with that pain, so we turn to alcohol for that pain. In a culture in which our marijuana is legal, we smoke it just to find peace. And just to dull our senses and just to forget and just to deal with what it is that we're facing. And we do all these things without realizing that God has already provided an answer. That through prayer, He can give us wisdom. And He can take away that confusion. And He can supplant any desire for anything that would move us away from something that is bad for us, not just short-term but long-term, and brings with it a myriad of consequences that we haven't even seen or calculated. But God is still showing us and revealing to us that if we choose His way and His path, that path of wisdom will crush confusion in our lives. It will destroy it. It will eliminate it. It will no longer have any kind of hold or authority over us. And we'll be able to step forward in the power of the resurrection like never before. The power that rose Jesus from the dead is the same power that is within you. The power to overcome and to not allow things to overtake and overcome you. This room is filled with strong conquerors in Jesus Christ. And when we take on the mind of Christ, we have the ability to conquer and overcome the very things that we are unable to do on our own. And so be attentive to the insights, be attentive to the promptings that come to you. Because as you seek God's will through prayer and ask for His wisdom, you're going to see that God's wisdom is going to begin to appear in your life. You've asked for wisdom, and now God is sending you signs of His wisdom. It's not just through the scriptures, but it's through the other ways that we saw in previous messages that God speaks to us, and how important it is to recognize those signs. But when we're confused, it's a sign. It's a sign that God doesn't want us to be on the path that we're on, just like when we have inner turmoil. And so when you trust God's wisdom to direct your path, He's going to lead you out of confusion. And it's important for us to believe that, because in Proverbs, which is the key verse for this message, it says, trust in the Lord with all your heart. And it's important for us that we trust in the Lord with all our heart, and that we don't depend on our own understanding. You see, when we depend on our own understanding, that's when we are confused. Confusion comes from our dependence on the wrong one and the wrong thing. But when we put our dependence on the Lord, He takes away our confusion. He gives us the wisdom that we need. So if I'm confused about something, I have to say to myself, what am I depending on? What am I relying on? What am I hoping for? What is the outcome that I'm believing God for and trusting? What is it that I'm doing right now that seems like it's a good thing, but somehow it has replaced God from the primacy that He must have in my life? And when we identify that, then we see, oh, this is why I'm confused. I am loving this more than I am loving God. I am depending on this outcome more than I am depending on God. I am choosing this more than I am choosing God. I'm confused because my heart has been divided. And while it looks like I'm trying to be in alignment with God, all I'm demonstrating is how I am not in alignment with Him. And God is saying, pay attention to this sign. When you're confused, it is because you are not depending on my understanding, you're depending on yours. And that's why we have to turn to God and say, God, I need your wisdom here. I can't trust my thoughts. I can't trust my understanding. I cannot trust my feelings. I cannot trust my desires. I cannot trust my goals, my ambitions. I cannot trust everything that I have wanted to see realized in my life. I cannot trust any of that. I am praying right now that you begin to do a new work in my mind and in my heart. And you take away the strong desire that I have for this over having your wisdom. Give me your wisdom more than anything else that I am desiring right now. And as you pray this, and as you convict your own self to this path, because sometimes we have to talk ourselves into the right path, isn't it true? We have to be convinced of it just as much as we can be convicted of it. And here's what happens. Most of us only live at the place of conviction instead at the place where we have made a clear decision to move with confidence towards what God is telling us to do. And so we have a conscience. Everyone here has one. And we get convicted. But when we don't act on it, here's what happens. We enter into a place of confusion. God is saying, I don't want that for you. I don't want you to be people who are just convicted of something. But I want you to move with conviction towards a new outcome. With my wisdom guiding you on that path. Anybody else need that today? Anybody else want that right now? So that we can not be deceived in all of this. I wonder if you guys can just do something to get rid of the echo. Is it just me hearing it? You guys are hearing it too? So there's a really strong echo, and maybe it's coming from the monitor, I'm not sure. But maybe oh, that's better. Thank you, Richard. If I don't speak up, then the sound guys don't apply their wisdom. Good, thank you so much. So much better. I feel like that inner turmoil is gone. The confusion has left me. I have peace. Anybody else have it now too? A little bit better. Thank you. It's good. So I want you to do something that we started last week, and I think it's specifically we have to ask God this question. And it's going to help you discern whether or not you should move on. Specifically ask God if you should stay or move on. You know, when we ask God for wisdom, it's so general that it's not specific enough. And we learned that we have to be specific with God. Yes. And with God, you have to ask this question. I have learned in my spiritual journey, this is the most important question that I can ask when I'm confused. When I have inner turmoil, when I have a lack of peace, I have learned to ask this question. Lord, should I stay or should I move on? Why? Because I'm a person, just like you, who can find himself living at extremes. Extremes of holding on too tightly or the extreme of wanting to let go too soon. And if I don't ask God this question, I can fall into the trap of holding on, just like I can fall into the trap of walking away. And so I cannot trust myself. And this is where God's wisdom comes in. And often what people say to me, and this happens all the time, is that, Pastor, you don't know my story, you don't know my journey. Pastor, you don't know how much I've tried. You don't know what I've been through, what I've gone through. And the answer to all that is true. I don't. I have no clue, no understanding of the impact, the trauma, the tragedy, the effort, the financial pain that this has caused you, the emotional damage, and on and on and on we can go. I understand all of that. I never, ever want to assume that I would know better. But then my question always is, have you prayed? And ask God specifically if He has asked you to stay on or to move on. And has God been clear about what you need to do? And then if the answer is no, He hasn't been clear, then you say, okay, well, you have to pray for wisdom and clarity in this. Obviously, there's confusion. Obviously, there's a lack of inner peace. There's turmoil. There's unease in all these areas of your life. Now you need to know, what does God want you to do? Because when God sets you free, you're free. And it doesn't matter if people try to hold you back and say, you're doing something that's unbiblical, unscriptural, you're doing something that you shouldn't be doing. When you've been set free by the Lord, none of that registers, because you're kind of like, no, I considered all of that, which is why I stayed as long as I did. But now the Lord has released me, and now I'm free. When the Lord releases you, wow, you live life free. You don't live with this place of weird conviction where your conscience isn't awakened to the reality of who God is and what He wants you to do and the decisions that He wants you to take. You move forward with command, and you realize that God has spoken and it's clear. Just like He can tell you, no, I'm not done with this situation yet. And you need to hold on a little while longer. And how many times have people held on at the command of God to then see the miracle? To see the restoration, to see the resurrection, to see something that was done and it was over and it was finished. But God said, hold on, and then the miracle happened. You see, that's what you don't want to do. You don't want to act in a way where you are holding on to your emotional preference of the situation. You want to move at the command and the authority of God. Okay, the miracle's about to happen. I'm able to go to one more point. Are we ready? Okay. I want to talk to you about another sign that we often ignore. And we ignore it, and we ignore it, and we keep ignoring it. And it's an unhealthy relationship. I want to talk to you about this because I realize that we're all unhealthy. There isn't a person here in this room that is the epitome of health. When it comes to relationships, we're all flawed, we're all broken. I think we also, like, if we have kids, we raise our kids sometimes from that place of trauma, from that place of brokenness. We enter into one relationship after another with our baggage. We get rid of some, but we seem to collect more along the way. You see this happen. Even as we get older, while we gain some experience and wisdom, if we don't heal properly and if we don't deal with our issues correctly, you can see how those things tend to carry over. And I know that when we talk about unhealthy relationships, it's easy to just look outward, but we have to stop doing that. We have to get healthy ourselves. The only way you can truly have a healthy relationship is by being healthy, and then that way you can recognize what unhealthy is. And you can speak from a place of healing instead of a place of condemnation and judgment, where all you're doing is you're just comparing your own understanding of each other's unhealthiness. Where your unhealthiness looks one way, and then someone else's unhealthiness looks another way. And then that person's unhealthiness looks like this, and yours looks like that. And when they look at your unhealthiness is so unhealthy for them, but they don't see how unhealthy their own unhealthiness is. And this is what relationships are. They're messy, and this is what happens. And we all have a measure that is unhealthy within us. And a healthy relationship is what needs to inspire and support us. And here's how I'm going to define it: spiritually and emotionally. If you have emotional support but you don't have spiritual support, your relationship isn't healthy. Now, it's not because it can't be healthy, but it's because you can't share everything that is important to God as it's important to you. And I imagine that for everyone here, even if we're not at the same place, even in our relationships spiritually, we understand the importance of spirituality. We understand the importance of being born again, of having a relationship with Jesus, of believing that what He died for was just more than just a pleasant story, but it was about freedom and deliverance, and it was about being made whole and about restoring us into a right relationship with our Creator and our Heavenly Father. You see, when our relationship becomes stagnant, even harmful, it's a sign that God might be telling us to move on. It's a sign that God is telling us, pay attention to this. Look at what's happening here. What are you doing about it? Why are you allowing it to continue? And over again, we look at things that are spiritually wrong and even emotionally wrong, but we do what we always do. We just stay where we are with who we're with, and we allow things to continue as they are instead of saying, this needs to stop. This is a sign. This is a sign that something is wrong. It's a sign that we are not spiritually connected. It's a sign that we are not emotionally connected. It's a sign that we don't look at each other like we did. We don't hold each other like we did. We don't have intimacy like we did. We don't look at the same things with the same values and views and understanding. We argue about things that we shouldn't be arguing about. We should be on the same page for these things. Instead, we find ourselves divided because our view of what is healthy is distorted. And when our view of what is healthy is distorted, then we don't understand what it is that we should be truly working on and depending on spiritually and emotionally in the relationship that we're in. God always tells us to pursue healthy relationships. He tells us to promote growth and to promote harmony. In Proverbs chapter 13, verse 20, it says this: when you walk with the wise, you will become wise. But when you associate with fools, you will always get into trouble. And God is saying, why are you with people who do not believe in the wisdom of God and it being higher than your own? See, a fool is someone who goes by their own wisdom, who follows the passions and the pleasures of their own flesh, who pursues every thought and every desire and every will that they have that is driven and directed by their emotions, instead of bringing all of those things to God and saying, God, you discern all this. You help me to figure this out. You help me to take the right steps and to move in the right direction and to be the right person, because right now I'm confused by all of this. That's why relationships play such a significant role in our lives. God desires healthy, uplifting connections. God intends for us to be in relationships where everyone involved puts love into action. And when a relationship becomes stagnant and even harmful, it's crucial for us to consider whether God may be leading us to then move on. Because the Bible emphasizes the importance of surrounding ourselves with wise and godly people who contribute positively in our lives. Do you believe in that? And so we need to sometimes put distance and give God an opportunity to do what needs to be done. In 1 Thessalonians 5:11, it says this, so encourage each other and build each other up just as you are already doing. God is starting from the assumption that we are already doing this. That when we speak, we are building each other up. When we are actively engaged in a relationship, this is what we're doing. We're building. We're not tearing down. We're not making things worse. We're not making things harder. We're not making things more challenging and more difficult. We are working with God for peace and for harmony. Our aim is healthy, not unhealthy. And so God is saying, this is where I want you to launch from. This is where I want you to be working. I want you to be people who encourage each other and build each other up. And this is what he states as a clear standard, and it's essential and it's important that we obey it. In 1 Corinthians 15:33, it says, don't be fooled by those who say such things. The kind of flattery that maybe has no substance to it, but it says, bad company always corrupts good character. And what God is saying is that you need to be with healthy people, because otherwise, the person who is most in jeopardy here is you. The person who is going to lose out in all of this is you. You are going to become a person that you no longer recognize. I've had people come up to me and say, Pastor, I don't recognize myself. I said, it's because you've been in an unhealthy relationship. You've lost sight of who you truly are because you have been corrupted by bad company. You no longer know what it looks like to be you because you have allowed yourself to be, unfortunately, manipulated and controlled and talked down to and spoken to and abused by and told over and over again of how unhealthy you are by an unhealthy person. When I see people that are broken, I think, who is it that has been so unhealthy in your life to bring you to this point? And why have you allowed it to go this far? See, I never look at an unhealthy person and think it's them alone. I look at an unhealthy person and I say, who was unhealthy before you became unhealthy? Who were you with that corrupted you? Is this starting to register? Is this starting to make sense? You see, what God wants to do is he wants to give us not just the mind, but the character of Jesus Christ. And you cannot have your mind changed and step out of a place of confusion or an unhealthy relationship if you don't know what God is telling you to do, if you're not asking God for His wisdom to be poured down into you to help you on the path that you're on. Look, I know that we can love people and love them so deeply and so profoundly that we can't even envision and imagine our life apart from them. I know that sometimes we can love people so profoundly that we can be profoundly wrong. You see, unfortunately, love cannot fix everything. When that love is directed towards someone and something that is unhealthy and God is asking you to move on from instead. But you need God's wisdom to make that decision. If you make it by yourself, you're going to stay too long or you're going to leave too early. And you need God to speak to you. And you need to specifically ask God if you should stay or if you should move on. You're asking God for what? His wisdom. Because you know that the only way to have a healthy relationship is to become healthy yourself. But for you to become healthy, that which is unhealthy has to stop. It has to end. And God needs to help you to start to take steps in seeing that end in you, but also through you. And God wants to guide you and direct you in fulfilling and accomplishing that very thing. And so let us specifically ask God what we should do. And God will. He promises to give you the answer. You believe that right now? You believe that for yourself? God will always give you the answer.